Okay, and we're live. Excuse me. Right. I'll just wait for a couple of people to trickle in. And I was going to talk today about Getter, the new social media platform slash Ponzi scheme. I honestly don't know. I don't know how to describe it. Ryan Long and Danny Palautrick actually did a pretty funny segment on this during their podcast. I don't know how many of you are familiar with their podcast, but it's called the Boys Cast, and they had a segment when they were talking about the investment in this social media, this MAGA themed social media venture, and the ostensible reason for it was because pro Trump voices were being deplatformed or censored by platforms like Twitter and all of the big tech behemoths. And it's interesting. I didn't do much investigation, but I've been listening to some stories about this ever since it's gone online. And beyond the the kind of superficial, well, I wouldn't say superficial, but beyond some of the some of the objections, like it's being designed by this guy Jason Miller, who already has a very shady, quasi criminal past. And it's being bankrolled by some Chinese investment firm. Uh, and I think the CEO of Gab was actually sent out a circular about this the other day, describing all of the some of the things behind the scenes that he objected to. And one of the other, beyond those objections, there's also the notion that it really isn't a free site. There are all sorts of restrictions and limitations on people who are posting there, and it, it, it seems to be a site basically for some mainstream Donald Trump supporters to amplify their voice rather than an actual alternative to Twitter. And there, as someone said about Twitter, it probably is the easiest site to replicate. If you were going to construct a conservative, libertarian, right wing alternative to Twitter, it would be much simpler than doing the same for Facebook or any of these other, hey GW, any of these other huge huge big tech sites. Um, but that seems to be the idea. It's essentially a pro Trump or mainstream MAGA site. Oh, well, that's okay. As long as I'm actually being heard, you can mute it if you want. It's not a big deal. But but that seems to be the basic idea. So the conception of it as some sort of free alternative to high tower time, alternative to Twitter, where you can go on and interact freely with everyone else, and you're not going to have your speech circumscribed. That that really was sort of an illusion. But I think beyond that, there's the objection that it's not. I mean, do you really want this? One of the or maybe the main asset a site like Twitter is that you have access to an entire social media landscape. You're not penned in. You're not penned into this little insular bubble where you're communicating with other people who agree with you. You can, in fact, I mean, that was one of the one of the main things about Twitter. You could challenge all of the idiotic premises put forward by the corporate media, the New York Times or Newsweek when it still existed, to, the Washington Post, CNN. You could actually go on there and fact check journalists in real time. You could, which is something that you can't do on a site where there are no where there are no journalists, where it's sort of a boutique website where you interact with people that more or less align with your political point of view. It's kind of it sort of defeats the purpose of going there in the first place. And Scott Greer mentioned this. There are reasons why you would want to cultivate a community of like-minded individuals, but I don't think it really serves the purpose of social media. And one of the main purposes was to curtail this narrative, whether it's on race, or whether it's on race or gender issues, or just the media itself. You were able to expose their deceptions and catalog them. You were essentially able to get to give receipts for every media crime, and they would have to, um, even if they ignored it, that itself was an indictment of sorts, and that's something that's completely absent from these little curated boutique alternatives to things like Twitter and Facebook. And I think it's you have to look at it in from a broader perspective. And I was thinking about Thomas Sowell, some of his writing on economics. He has a lot of essays and books that explore this idea of model minorities, people that belong to an ethnic group that succeeds in spite of the fact that they're surrounded by uh, people that may be hostile to their aspirations. They're able to plant roots and succeed and economically, in spite of the fact that they're within a country or within a society that's not that isn't designed to cater to their needs. And there are a couple of groups where you see this: the Chinese, Indians. Um, you see vibrant communities of these minorities in places like West Africa, Tan, uh, Tanzania, Zanzibar. The Lebanese are another group. You see them in South America, in North America, in places like New York City, in Brooklyn. One of the most enduring, successful minorities is the Lebanese, and they're able to do this in spite of language barriers, in spite of political obstacles. And I think there's a lesson to be drawn there. You see this particularly in New York City. One of the things, if you live in Brooklyn or Staten Island, one of the things that keeps popping up is the extent of Chinese expansion. The fact that you see realtor signs in Mandarin, you'll see pictures of Chinese real estate agents popping up more and more. I went to New Dorp a few weeks ago, and I saw three new Chinese owned businesses. Um, I think one was a cafe, another was a hair salon, and I forget what the third one was. But you see this constant expansion in spite of seeming obstacles that doesn't seem to deter them from setting down roots, from opening businesses, from establishing footholds in communities that are not Chinese, where there are very few or no Chinese people living. You see them pop up, and I oh hi Alejandro. You see, and I think there's a lesson to be drawn from that experience, um, which is namely you don't simply just run away whenever you don't run away whenever you face any headwinds. It's not in the long run. It's a self defeating strategy, and I think this is something that conservatives, as they become besieged, it's something they need to learn from. Aaron Renn has talked about this as well on his podcast, which used to be known as the Masculinist. I think now it's called the Aaron Renn Show. But he's talked about this in the context of Christianity, the fact that we live in a culture that's become inimical to Christianity. We used to live in a culture that embraced Christianity and where that was the default setting, more or less. And then it became value neutral, and now it's actively hostile. The society we live in is despises the values of the church, and the church hasn't really adapted well to that to that setting. I mean, some have adopted better than others. Like John MacArthur is a great example. His his successful fight to keep the doors of his church open. When you're not going to win, that's a good question. I mean, there are some things that are not. I don't advocate tilting at windmills necessarily. Like the idea of New York City. That's why you have, and so many of my friends have left New York City because of this. There's no real strategy, or where there's no real strategy for turning New York into a place where our values could be embraced. I mean, just demographically, terms of the outlook, it doesn't seem like there's a way to reconfigure our political institutions on a local level. If you live in a city of 8 million people and 60 to 70% of them are actively hostile to your values, and there's no way you're not going to import 2 or 3 million right wing voters. So, I mean, I think there's a sense where you need to cut bait. But going back to my earlier example, that my earlier example, the Chinese, that's sort of hardwired into their mindset not to look at the obstacles. The fact that that you're situated in a position that's that's something that's a mindset I think more people on our side need to adopt. Uh, at least in this respect, the idea that you surrender you surrender ground. Um, Politically, it's not really useful in the long run because you keep surrendering long enough, and then you'll you have nowhere to stand. And you see this on the electoral map. There are states that used to be solid red states, and gradually they became more and more purple, and now they're deep blue. Um, and states that used to be bellwether states now are solidly in the column of statism, seemingly irretrievably lost. Colorado is a good example of that state, of that, or California, which used to be a battleground state continually ever since the throughout the 20th century, and now it's there's really no real there's no real opportunity to reclaim it. And I think that's one of the things you one of the ways to resist this is to adopt a mindset of resistance, not acquiescing, not placidly acceding to this idea that you need to retreat. And it's about, I think part of it is about just changing your mindset in a way. And I didn't intend this video as a it's not one of those things where we have to adopt the mindset of Chinese people or Indian people or the Lebanese, but I think it is. I think there are lessons to be drawn from those experiences. I mean, groups that groups that uh, didn't see themselves necessarily as continually besieged. Rather, they saw themselves as setting down roots in a place and then keeping them, and not retreating. So, just my scattered thoughts. I didn't intend for this to be a long live stream. So I'll thanks Alejandro GW, Tower Time. I will see you all next time.